Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag. My name is Eileen Burkton. I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. The videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of the Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society and the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed is a native of Omaha, Nebraska. He has an undergraduate degree in art history and sociology from Lindenwood College in St. Charles, Missouri. He lived in Boston for 11 years and was a freelance architectural historian. While in Boston, he received a PhD from Boston University in architectural history. In 1985, he returned to Nebraska and became, and still is, the City of Lincoln Historic Preservation Planner. Today, Ed is going to give a recap of PAL's 24th Annual Awards presentation, and the winner is. Please join me in welcoming Ed Zimmer.
Thank you, Eileen. We'll get right into it, because I always like to start with not just the awards, but where we have those meetings. So the venue is. And we've met it over those 24 years, we've met at many fascinating places, including the courtroom in the old post office courthouse before it was rehabbed, and after the ceiling was again revealed. So we've gone from black and white to color. We really had, because the windows were reopened, and it's a spectacular space. PAL had toured Whittier before it was back in full use again, and then had an annual meeting there in the nice space that University of Nebraska has prepared. We met out at Whitehall, the state-owned campus, formerly Olive White Mansion, formerly Orphanage, out on the east edge of University Place, and at Wyuka Chapel in Wyuka Cemetery. Several years ago, met at Trinity Methodist, sometimes visiting sites that had recently been rehabbed, sometimes visiting sites that we wanted to draw attention to for preservation concerns. And among the last few sites, one year met at Lee's Restaurant out towards Pioneers Park, and then we're one of the final groups to share the party room at Valentino's on Holdridge before the old building came down, but the sign stayed and moved moved just across the street to the east. I love that sign. I think it was our first announcement of pizza in Lincoln, and it sits out on the public right-of-way. And we worked it into the redevelopment agreement so it wouldn't go away. Last year we're back at Wyuka, but not in the chapel, but in the refurbished stable space. And then this year met at St. Paul Methodist downtown, which you should not recognize from this view, because this is the 1885 St. Paul, captured about 1889 here, and unfortunately in 1899 the building burned. And the congregation quickly commissioned a new design by Brown, Barton, and Davis of Cincinnati. And one of the things that fascinates me is we look at the old building and at the new design. Those round arched windows, the little row, came back on the new building. If you look very closely, you can see some of the more highly finished limestone is salvaged from the burned building. Some almost matching, but not exactly matching material was finished new for the new design. And in 1901, they dedicated the new St. Paul with the plaque over the front door and a cornerstone. And then to help architectural historians out, a descriptive plaque so we could keep track of the different dates all in one place. Our host for that meeting was Carmen Maurer, a member of PAL, a member of the congregation. And one of the nifty parts of the annual meeting this year was a little fundraiser, a raffle to go with Carmen up into the bell tower and watch her play the McKinley chimes. I didn't participate in the raffle, but I was fortunate that when Wayne Bowles won, he sent me up to the tower instead. And so a couple Sundays later, I got to watch Carmen play the chimes. And I also got to, let's see, apparently the red sock is so that when you're playing the chimes, you know which is the flat one. And then we even went up to visit the bells themselves. Until I had the chance to go visit and hear them, see them play, I'd never quite clarified just when they went up in the tower. I knew it was after the first construction. Turns out they were anticipating the bells even as they were finishing the building. They had installed them by 1902. There was a fundraiser. They were installed in honor of the assassinated President McKinley, and the New York Bell Company sent out a representative to play the first concert. And then there's lots of newspaper announcements of when big events would occur in town, the McKinley chimes would be played. I thought they'd taken the spire off the top of the tower, I'd always heard, to accommodate the bells, but it was, I think it's true, but it was 8 years later. So it was a process apparently of deciding that they put them up there, but they weren't sure that they had the permanent stability, and adjusted the tower and took off the top elements, reducing it to the familiar flat-topped tower, but 8 years after they had first installed the bells. So now I'm on a mission to find out just what was the discussion in those 8 years and what prompted the final decision that it was time to take down the bells. We took a little tour of the interior as we visited, and particularly the spectacular stained glass that light the sanctuary. Turns out these are very familiar icons, not just the scenes of the angel appearing to the shepherds and the women at the tomb, but also the source material. Bernhard Plockhorst, a German artist, was the very popular religious artist of the late 19th, early 20th century, died in 1907. In fact, here is Mr. Plockhorst, not in stained glass. I don't know if he's ever been rendered into stained glass, but his paintings have been very widely rendered into stained glass. And both of the St. Paul major windows are from his work. I could find a lot of other examples of stained glass from those same paintings, none nearly as nice as these, and probably none nearly as large either. And then finally there was the addition of really doubling the footprint of the church a century after it was built, and very nicely again acknowledged their heritage with a new plaque over a side entrance and a new cornerstone, really reflecting that original treatment. So it was a great site for the annual meeting and for the award ceremony that PAL has incorporated in the annual meeting for years. And I'll go through the categories and now recognize who the winners were for this year. In the category of residential rehabilitation, PAL's looked at a wide variety of properties over the years, from the huge concrete block Levitt farmhouse that was picked up from 70th and O and moved out to South 148th Street in the county and is now Prairie Creek Bed and Breakfast, to the small in-town bungalow that George Berlinghoff designed for R.O. Steak at 28th and N Streets in the Woods Park neighborhood. The F.M. Hall, Anna and Frank Hall House at 11th and D Streets, in historic image and beautifully maintained by the Baker's current owners. And then this year, the award winner was a very handsome, smaller house, American Foursquare variation in the woods, in the near South neighborhood at 1803 E Street. This was the Don and Julia Love house, and Love was the Lincoln banker, businessman, mayor, whose eventual gifts put their name on Love Memorial Library and Love Memorial Hall on East Campus. The building itself is 1902. It's been very nicely maintained over the years, but the most recent owners have added some of the missing features. You could see in this view how the balustrade on top of the little portico was only suggested by the remaining posts against the clapboard wall. The current owners restored that, which really puts the proportions back properly for the entrance, and done a beautiful paint job, including calling out some of the fine paneling up under the cornice. Want to do just a little architectural history on this because PAL's a captive audience when I do these, and I get to do a little architectural history. Putting it in its neighborhood context from the 1903 Sanborn. There's our house. We haven't yet built the house beside it at the corner. Just behind it across the alley was this house, the Teeter family home, also about 1902. And we know this was designed by Ferdinand Fisk, who had been in Lincoln building very productively in late 1880s, early 1890s. Went wandering during the crash of the 1890s and ended up in Des Moines, Iowa, or in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for a time. Had a partner there named Diamond, and Fisk and Diamond are designing both in Cedar Rapids extensively and in Lincoln in the early 20th century, and we know this is one of their houses. We also know that the Loves bought their lot from the Teeters, so they weren't just backdoor neighbors, they were associated beyond that. And then right across the street, across E Street, is another Fisk design, this one for the Toll family. And so I would hypothesize that it's quite likely that Fisk also did the Don and Julia Love house. And it has the basic American four-square form, but varies from it in those nice subtle details, and particularly the lovely way in which the clapboard width is varied to create a pattern of what would otherwise be just a very simple wall. But everything about this house is just that little bit enriched, and it's characteristic of Fisk's work at that time. So we were pleased to present the award this year to Rodney and Sue Berkman, who are taking such lovely care of the house, and they received the plaque from Bill Wood, the PAL president. Next category that PAL has recognized for years is stewardship of its significant property, not just immediate rehab, but just a heritage of taking care of an important building. And the buildings have ranged from the Retzlaff farmhouse out in Stevens Creek in 1867, perhaps the earliest inhabited house standing in the county, up to a modern landmark like Sheldon Art Museum by Philip Johnson. State Capitol itself has been honored in 1912 for the decades of restoration work maintaining that building. And this year, the award went to First Plymouth Congregational Church and their heritage of maintaining that building, but also very recent major work in sustaining the building. Building of 1929 to 32, designed by H. Van Buren McGonigal and Robert McLaughlin. And there's some beautiful images of how that building would appear, and then it did. This is a modern view that we just borrowed an antique car. Not really, but I think it's also indicates how beautifully maintained and how well preserved First Plymouth is. If this were a modern view, there'd be a black squirrel in the foreground, so we know that this is historic. Bell's getting ready to go up in the carillon. I think there should be a checkbox on the National Register form are historic postcards of this building extant. That should be part of the proof of significance. This is significant in lots of views. Just a spectacular building, beautiful parts, and then all knitted together in a lovely fashion. The colonnade, and even just the individual details in the building, the integration of the very complex brickwork, I think 10 sizes and shapes and colors of brick, and then the accent of the terracotta plaques within that, and the terracotta rose window with the grapes and wheat of communion, and then a beautiful, powerful, simple interior in that magnificent building. I imagine McGonagall, who had competed for the Capitol competition design, kicking himself around his New York office when Goodhue was chosen, saying, "I didn't know Nebraskans would take a tower. I do great towers." He had done great towers, and he was very fortunate to get to come back and do another great tower. There's no shame in being the second best tower in Lincoln, and I think First Plymouth can proudly claim that. The award recognized Davis Design for their very long ongoing work and Sampson Construction, but also the committee of great senior architects who are church members who gathered together and helped guide this most recent phase. And that included PAL President, of course, Bill Wood is on the left, and then Wynn Melhoff, Lowell Bird, and Lynn Jones, who are not all Davis Design, but a couple of them are. But they were working together on this project and accomplished a great one. PAL's also recognized, in addition to the residential rehab, has historically recognized commercial or institutional rehabilitation as well. And sometimes it's not a single building, but really a section or a set of projects. And this year, the recognition went to the Havelock Business Association and other associated groups working on the Havelock business section over the last several years. This was the Woods Brothers' vision of Havelock in 1917, with Havelock spread out in the foreground, a garden city, and off in the smoky horizon, some other place, we're not sure where it is, and the rail yard that sustained Havelock in the foreground. Among the key buildings in the section of Havelock Avenue, originally Jackson Avenue, later O Street, when Havelock renamed its main street, what other cities call their main street, and then after annexation it became Havelock Avenue, I think well named, was the Lancaster Block, individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This was sort of the seed building that the Lancaster Land Company built to demonstrate to buyers what they ought to buy and build in the new city. A double store with a meeting hall above originally, later converted to apartments. It declined very low and then was brought back by Bob and Vicki Rokeby into a double store building and apartments above. And beside it is the IOOF Hall, now a commercial building, Oddfellows building originally. The project that Havelock Business Association, supported by the City Urban Development Department, has carried out, have rehabbed facades, have worked on the streetscape, have even helped uplift the signs along this commercial street, because they're such an important part of a commercial street. And so even a little place like the beauty salon gets a newly designed sign, as well as precinct marking signs for the railroad heritage of the area. We go a little further west on Havelock Avenue and look back to the east, this in about 1900, particularly looking at the double commercial block on the right-hand side next to what becomes for a long time the hardware store. Arnold's Tavern has been in that double block for a long, long time, and their rehab included rehabbing the beer goblet. It's a commercial district, it's a great old neon, and I think that was a project well done. Right across the street is Lincoln's only single-screen neighborhood small-town theater, the Joyo, originally built as the Lyric in 1928. Here was pre-rehab and post-rehab, and really good commercial district post-rehabs often look just about the same, but the neon works again. Also, the roof doesn't leak, and they've got storage space and other essential pieces, but their little beautiful ticket booth is still there under that lovely canopy. So the Havelock Business Association, Erickson Sullivan Architects, directing the facade improvements, even some of the sign designs, and the Lincoln Urban Development Department, all were honored and recognized with Bill Wood standing next to Wynn Hermstadt of City Urban Development, Scott Sullivan of the architecture firm, David Cole, Marty Wenzel, and others from Havelock Business Association. A couple of years after the awards started, Powell realized that some of the important projects weren't pure preservation projects, but were either new buildings in an historic area or sometimes rehab that needed for its program or its purpose to go beyond a simple preservation solution to a more complex combination of new and old. And Powell has been honoring those for, I think, probably 20 of the 24 years at least. And this year, the beloved and handsome but completely outmoded recreation building on East Campus, UNL's East Campus, Fisk and McGinnis design of the 1920s, which had been studied extensively for simple replacement. The rec program on East Campus was not at all comparable to downtown. Facility in itself couldn't handle the current needs, and the plan initially was tear it down. Instead, after careful study, a plan that integrated new building with the old was carried out, creating quite a spectacular wrap around much of the old building, but retaining the old structure and the beautiful windows and some of those spectacular spaces of the old building in the new project. And so for that project, the University of Nebraska and their rec program and Sinclair Hilly, their architects, were honored and were all represented in the awards ceremony. I do mention now and then that my son-in-law helped lead the student campaign that funded the project. The City Center Award was another of the newer ones that sometimes has honored an activity like Farmers Market, or one year was the Children's Museum, but things that help retain the vitality and activity at the center of the city, without which preservation does not occur and without which preservation doesn't have a purpose. They're really together. It is the buildings, the people, and the activities that take place in them. And this one really focuses on some of those key activities. And this year was a unique designation for the St. Thomas Aquinas and Newman Center project on the east edge of the UNL City campus. Beautiful church building with associated activity center beside it. On a compact site, occupies just about a quarter block. And I've talked to Kevin Clark, the architect, and he swears, and I believe Kevin, that they did not design it simply for the purpose of beautiful postcards, but it looks like they could have. You could make the case. And this is the one on which I would base that argument. But as Kevin points out, they didn't even know as they were carrying out the building whether they would be able to accomplish all of the stenciling and painting and other enrichment that really completed this interior. But quite a spectacular work of ecclesiastical architecture. We're approaching the stained glass over the altar, looking up at the ceiling over the sanctuary, and a little closer in. Continuing our progression eastward into the grand window that lights the sanctuary. Looking at that window from the outside, so this would be from the southeast. And then stepping back inside and looking from the altar back through the sanctuary space. I did not take these photographs. I could not take these photographs. And just a spectacular quality of the decorative work as well. And then attached to it, the office and meeting and classroom spaces of the Newman Center, Catholic Student Center on UNL campus. Lobby space, and some classroom, and various gathering spaces inside the building. And so both the sponsors of the project, the clients of the project, the Catholic Church and the Newman Center, and their designer, Clark Collaborative, accepted the award with Bill, here photographed with Father Robert Miata, Kevin, the lead architect and the proprietor of Clark Collaborative. And Kevin rushed to the meeting and looked splendid. He had his tie on and everything. It was great that he got there to join us. Great Commoner Award, some of the categories obviously are buildings, some of them, and they all honor individuals, but some of them focused directly on individuals and their contributions. The Great Commoner focuses on people engaged in preservation education. And this year the award went to the mainstay of Nebraska Main Street program. Here we're looking at two of the communities in which Elizabeth Chase does her preservation education work, and education is at the base of the Main Street program, encouraging local communities and empowering communities to carry out that economic redevelopment, economic restructuring, to keep small town main commercial areas vital and vibrant, contributing to their towns. And Elizabeth has done that work for decades and has done it extremely well. We were hard pressed to find a picture with Elizabeth in it because she's usually taking pictures of her groups, but we did press and find one. And so Bill honored and recognized Elizabeth Chase for her work in the Nebraska Main Street program. And then speaking of Bill, the president has reserved the privilege for many years at PAL to make a couple awards on his or her own. And these are often fascinating ones of folks that made a contribution to their term of service or just unrecognized preservation advocates. And this year Bill recognized a group that he had seen doing particularly good work in masonry restoration with projects like K Street Power Plant, record storage building, back to Havelock Avenue and the saloon rehab, and Bill's own house, which has got very complex masonry issues and challenges in its integration of stone and tile and brick. And so first of Bill's two choices for President's Award was Masonry Construction, Inc., who are out of Bellevue but do beautiful masonry work all over Nebraska and beyond. And both the proprietor in the center and two of his key workmen joined Bill for the ceremony. And then Bill also chose to recognize William Gustafson, who for years was behind cameras and never got in front of the camera that we could find because we can't find a picture of Bill, but helped out for many, many years with the brown bags every month. And so is his good friend John Strope stood up for him to receive the plaque and is behind the camera even today. Not quite as camera shy, though. We can find at least the rare picture of John. And then the big award, the Lifetime Achievement Award, think of it, for Pal, has been the Helen Boosalis Award. And Helen, of course, was not only Lincoln's 2-term mayor and several-term city councilwoman before that, but was a trustee of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And after her terms as mayor, while she was still very active in preservation, a young guy, Nebraskan, transplanted to Boston and back to Lincoln, came to town. And she was the second mayor I was working for, even though she was not mayor anymore, because she would call me up and tell me what to do. And one of the things she told me to do was I should help start a preservation group. I said, well, I'm the city guy, that would be a private group. Ed? Yes, Mrs. Mayor. And I helped start the preservation group. And from the beginning, we asked Helen, could we borrow just her good name for the big award? Not a donation, not a sponsorship, just her good name. And she said yes. And the next year she called back and said, and how much am I giving each year? I said, no, that was not the agreement. And she gave. And she gave every year for the rest of her life, and significantly to Pal. So she asked, but she also gave even more generously than she asked. This year, we recognized a fine career in Nebraska, culminating a series of locations of that fine career of the outgoing director and CEO of the Nebraska State Historical Society, Michael Smith. Major projects included in his term were the renovation of this building, major project with state, strong and important state support. When we gathered pictures of Mike Smith, we found he was almost always at the back of the group or off to one side. It was hard to get him in the middle of a picture, which I think says something significant. Here, the ribbon cutting of the renovation of the headquarters building, signing of the key LB 191 tax program, and he's hiding there off on the right next to Bob Puschendorf, and just about totally hiding in the picture. He was found at the center of a view of a visit to an archaeological site with his blue jeans prudently tucked into his socks, which you do in Tick country. And I'm not sure, I think he's saying his hands are clean, but I think maybe he's saying the mosquitoes are this big. He was traveling on the date of the event, but sent his deputy, Bob Puschendorf, to receive the plaque in recognition of work well done and a fine career in Nebraska, now coming to retirement. And this was the whole happy crew on that, was it March Day, showing off the plaques they'd received from PAL. Diverse group with many different contributions, but I think also reflects the vitality of preservation activities in Lincoln, Nebraska. With that, I will wrap up. I will take a question if you have them, but I'm not sure that this is the kind of presentation that should prompt questions. And if you ask whether any of these folks were worthy, we'll cut that tape out, because they all are. Thank you all. Bob.
Going back to almost the first one, the house with the neat siding pattern, and then you showed a house across the alley from it?
Yes.
And that's gone because of that ugly housing project, right?
No, the one across the alley is the Teeter's house at 1812 D Street is still there. The one across the street, forward of it, north of it, is gone for the housing, the worthy housing project for the people who live in it.
So of the three you've shown, are they all still in existence?
No, you're right. The toll house on the north side of East Street is gone.
For that
what
housing.
was called Charles Trust, I think.
Yeah.
Housing project, yeah.
Right
It was
across-
on a big triple lot, and I think that made it also,
Right across from Abel Park.
yes, yes, that's where we are. Yes. I'm off to my next meeting.